but and she's one of our consultants, and she has been supporting a lot of clients in becoming compliant with the standard and getting audit ready. But unfortunately, she's become ill, so I will just do it together. Or I will just do it alone, together with two of my other colleagues that I've seen here in the room. Omar's here and Anne-Wil's here. They're both from our climate neutral team, climate neutral certification team. Omar in the function of a carbon advisor, and Anne-Wil supporting certification bodies and overseeing their performance. So I would love to meet all of you, because a lot of you I've never met before, and a lot of you are potentially interested clients. Some of you are perhaps already in the process of certification, or are taking baby steps to get there. And that's, that means that I have not been very much involved with you yet. So I would just like to say a little bit about myself. My name is Ellen Brouwer. I am the certification program manager, so I've been setting up the certification program as it is today. I joined the Climate Neutral Group approximately 3.5 years ago. 3.5 years, yeah. I have a background in certification. In the past, I've been working with UTZ and Rainforest Alliance, two schemes in relation to agricultural commodities. So yeah, I was contacted by the Climate Neutral Group to see if I wanted to revise their certification program. And I must confess, at that time, I didn't know the organization. So, I looked a little bit at the website and all of that. And then I thought, like, wow, that's interesting, because honestly, I can continue working at that time with the Rainforest Alliance. But in the end, if we're not going to tackle climate change, all the work that I'm putting into getting all these farmers compliant in, for their agricultural commodities like oranges or cocoa or coffee, in the end, there will not be any future for them. So, the switch was made quite easily. I moved over to the Climate Neutral Group quite fast. And since then, we've been working on, sharpening the certification program till where it is today. So that is, in short, a little bit about me. I live in Woerden in the Netherlands, together with my husband and little baby boy of nearly 3 years old, so he's not a baby anymore. And yeah, I really embrace working on good causes. So that has sort of been my history in the past. So I can say a lot about myself. I would love to meet all of you. And of course, we don't have time for that, but it is nice to that you took the opportunity to join this session. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to interrupt me. That's okay. I will also schedule some Q&A moments after each chapter, let's say after each section of this presentation. But if you have questions that can't wait, or if you just feel like, it's important for you to understand something, feel free to put your question in the chat, and Anne-Wil will start recording those, or and will tell me when I have to clarify something. So feel free to do that. Also, we have scheduled 2 hours. That's quite long. So if a break is needed, also feel free to let me know. And then a quick update on what I have envisioned. But also here, if there's any things that you think are important, let me know. Then we can discuss that as well. I start with a quick introduction. Then I'd like to say something about the spirit of the certification program. What does it stand for? What does it try to achieve? Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the standard and the requirements of the standard. I'm going to follow with the assurance protocol, which is a document that describes the certification process and all the rules and regulations in relation to becoming certified. Then I'm going to say something about the Trademarks and Claims Policy, which is another core program document, and it describes the permitted claims and how to deal with claims. A little bit about next steps of the program, and there's time for more questions if you may have some. But before I move ahead, I would like to do an inventory if there's anything in particular that you would like to discuss. I mean, you know, the program documents and everything that is available in relation to the certification program. I mean, we have a lot of stuff. So I can imagine that perhaps you have important questions or that there are certain concerns. If you do have these, now you can already express them. You can also do it throughout the presentation, because today this is really a session for you. So feel free to let me know what you want me to discuss, because I've got a bunch of slides. I've got approximately 70 slides. So you can also, so we can prioritize things, let's say. Is there anything already coming in, Annabelle?
No, not for the moment.
Okay. Then I'll just continue.
I have one.
But
Sorry.
I've raised. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I have one. Is the topic offsetting also going to be dealt with during this presentation?
Offsetting, yes. Yeah, slightly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not going to talk about the different projects that we have in our offsetting portfolio. If that is of interest, then I don't have that prepared. No. Then I just a little bit in general. Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Hello, Jürgen Utrecht. I have Benelux. I have also a question about how to define the scope of the certification. So when you have a we have a sales office in Breda, in the Netherlands, and we have our main business in Belgium, in Tongeren. So how do you set the scope for the certification?
Okay, fantastic question. I'm going to write that one down as well. I think we'll get through that as well, or I can go get that.
Okay.
Anything else? No? Then I just continue. So offsetting, we have a question, and setting boundaries. Okay, great. C&G is a organization that has as a purpose to help organization from A to zero CO2, and to realize a net zero carbon economy in 2050, according to the Paris Agreement. So this is sort of our mission. We were founded in 2002 by Triodos Bank and Doen Participaties. And in 2022, that is just a couple of months ago, we merged with the Antisis Group. So now we are actually a very big organization, and this merge, of course, has facilitated that we can now offer our services in more than 23 countries, with over by now it's already 1,200 net zero experts. So merging with Antisis was for us a very strategic choice, so that we could really expand our activities. And the activities that we are offering, I'm going to highlight to you in a second. Worldwide, we have supported over 3,000 organizations, so that's C&G alone, not Antisis. We have compensated over 12 million tons of CO2. And yeah, by doing so, of course, we contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We are an ICL member since last year, October. We are one of the founding partners and board members of ICROA, the overarching organization overseeing equality in the voluntary carbon market and offsetting. We are a B Corp certified organization, and we are an accredited provider since 2021 for CDP. So that's a lot, right? What does C&G do? In a nutshell, as I was just saying, our mission is to help companies to go from A to zero CO2. And for that, we offer 4, let's say, pillars or pieces of services or so. The first one is that we do a lot of footprinting calculations for companies. So we help you to calculate your carbon footprint, to set the boundaries, to define the scope and all of that. Then together with clients, we provide a lot of strategic advice in how you can reduce your CO2 emissions as much as possible. Everything else that you cannot offset yet, we provide offsets, credible offsets. Those are mainly gold standard and VCS offsets, but there can be others as well. But we maintain really the highest offset criteria. And then if you want to become certified, if you want to get the cherry on the cake, then you can actually get certified. That means if you're getting certified that you're doing footprinting reduction and offsets as well, not necessarily all with us, that's not needed, but it means that all of those 3 other steps you have to do as well. You can become certified for either your organization, part of your organization, products or services that you're supplying. It can also be a range of products and a range of services depending on what your ambition is. The spirit of the program. When we developed the certification program 3 years ago, we actually had a handbook, which was sort of version 1 of our certification program. When we sort of continued the development, we really thought, okay, what do we want to achieve? And we came to 4 different, let's say, pillars. First of all, what we knew for sure is we wanted to become an ambitious program that really sets the bar high and that really makes an actual difference. And we thought this was very important because the climate crisis is huge. We have to act fast and we have to act now. Then we wanted to have a program that was scalable. I mean, you can, if making impact is your driver, you need to be able to grow and to expand quickly. So we needed to have a program and a sort of a philosophy behind so that we can upscale rapidly. Very important also, yes, we want to make ambition, we want to be ambitious, but we want to do that in a credible manner. We really want to make sure that if people are buying a certified product, that you can be sure that it is certified and that you can be sure that this product meets the requirements of the standard. So we really wanted to have a credible program. But then, final pillar, it needs to be cost efficient, not only for our clients, but also for us, because we need to run our program as well. We have costs for that, but also in particular for the certification bodies to whom we have outsourced the certification processes. Otherwise, they cannot do their job properly. And, it becomes, in the end, also a problem for them. So these were the sort of the 4 pillars that we thought, okay, if we are going to design our certification program, that needs to be all part of it. And we had in mind that we wanted to become an ICIL member. And what does that mean? ICIL is sort of an overarching institution that oversees the credibility of a lot of different certification programs. And we had this as an ambition for ourselves. We really wanted to become an ICIL community member. So, yeah, then you have to start studying what it takes in order to get there. So we developed this roadmap. The whole philosophy of ICIL is that we are a scheme that works on continuous improvement. We need to remain impartial. We have to make sure that there's a solid assurance system. We want to be innovative. We have to have clear monitoring and evaluation processes and procedures and all of those kind of good practices. But the most important topic is we need to involve our stakeholders. And what does that mean? We can really build only a good program when it's being embedded well with all of our stakeholders. And that's not only clients, that's also NGOs, the governmental organizations, certification bodies, consulting firms, but also ourselves. So a lot of different stakeholders have a lot of different interests. And so what we did, we had a whole range of stakeholder consultations whereby all of our stakeholders were given the opportunity to provide feedback so that in the end we had version 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. till we came with a final version. And that is sort of the standard that you now have in front of you. So we became an ICIL community member in October last year after a lot of different, a long application process and a review process, which means that we follow the ICIL codes of good practice. And yeah, we can place ourselves in the line of schemes such as Fairtrade, Rainforest Alliance, FSC, Gold Standard, RSPO, etc. So it was a big achievement for us. When we developed the program, we developed the program around 3 core documents, program documents. The climate neutral standard, which contains all the criteria, the assurance protocol, and the trademarks and claims policy. And I'm going to show you in a sec. This is the URL. You can find all of these documents on our main page. This is our main website, and then there is this link, Program Documents 2022, and here you can find all of them. So I'm not going to send them to you, you can download them all. Actually, a new version of the Trademarks and Claims Policy and the Assurance Protocol was released in May. And that was released after some wise lessons learned during the first years of going live with this new program. So we wanted to make sure that all the sort of operational processes and procedures that sort of originally were not documented, that were incorporated in these, in these core documents. So we have had stakeholder revision process, and two new documents were released for the assurance protocol and the trademarks and claims policy last year in May. The program in a nutshell. Here you can see when you're certified, whether it's for an organization, service, or product, you can use this trademark. This is our formally registered trademark. And I think our trademark right now is registered formally in the Benelux at EU level. And I think also now in the US and several other countries. So more and more we're formally registering this trademark so that it's an official registered trademark. What does the program try to entail or to achieve? We require clients to set and achieve, and that's important, not only setting, but also achieving ambitious reduction targets. That means that clients need to achieve what we call the annual reduction target. And if they've achieved that year after year and remaining emissions are offset every year, clients may claim that the organization, service, or the product is climate neutral. This is really, in essence, what the program is about. So the clients that we're seeking are clients that are truly committed and show leadership in their domains, in their sectors, or in their industries to fight climate change. And our program is not easy, but with the support that we can offer and with the ambition that clients have, we really see that it's doable. But yeah, things need to happen, of course. So here's a summary of what needs to happen. Program in a nutshell. I think this slide says it all, but I'm going to explain it to you. The assumption on the left, I was saying you can get certified for your organization or for a product or service. What needs to happen? Imagine that here in 2020, this is sort of your starting point, your reference point. Could be 2021, could be earlier, but let's assume here 2020 is your reference point. That means between now and 2050, you need to reduce your emissions. That's visualized by the blue line. I hope you can see my cursor, right? Maybe Annabelle, you can confirm. Can you see my cursor?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yep. Okay.
It could be the case that in your country, there's an interim target prescribed by your government or other authorities. In the Netherlands, there's sort of this objective at the moment, your emissions are reduced with 49% compared to the baseline year, which actually is 1990, in 2030. So this is sort of a Dutch target. Other countries could have other targets, and those targets then apply. There's a big chance that at the EU level, the interim target for 2030 is going to be 55%. So it will be further sharpened. Everybody is talking about that, but it's not formal law yet. So, but yeah, it looks like it's going to go there. Now, every year you need to reduce your emissions year by year. That means, for instance, between 2020 and 2030, 49% needs to be reduced. That is per year, 49% divided by 10 years, because between 2020 and 2030, there's 10 years. So that's 4.9% per year. That 4.9% per year is your annual reduction target. Between 2030 and 2050, you can see there's more time and you have to reduce less fast. The annual reduction there is then 2.55% per year. And because you've got 20 years to reduce the emissions of 51%. Remaining emissions. So year after year, you're going to reduce more. Everything that you cannot reduce yet in a certain year is going to be offset. And that is visualized by the dotted black arrows going down. That means every year you're reducing and you're offsetting, and so that allows you to make a climate neutral certified claim. Now, what needs to be included in your inventory, your GHG inventory? If you want to get certified for your organization, you need to include all your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and what we call non-product attributable scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 and scope 2, are people familiar with these emissions and the classification scope 1, 2, and 3? Who's not familiar with this? Please feel free to speak up.
Saw a lot of nodding faces, but
That means that people are familiar with it. Scope 1 emissions, just to summarize, scope 1 and 2 emissions are all the emissions on which you have influence. So they occur in your own sphere of influence, in your own factory or in your own production sites. And they're related to gas use, energy use, all of those kind of emissions caused by your own operations. Non-product attributable scope 3 emissions are emissions on which we believe that you still have a lot of influence. So they are not directly related to the manufacturing or the sourcing of a particular product, so in your supply chain, but they are managed by others. For instance, business travel or commuting. So we think that if you have a lease plan for your employees, yes, the leased cars are driven by your employees, and so you cannot really, tell so they're not really your own emissions, but we still feel that you have a lot of influence because you can guide your employees how to use their cars and what kind of way they should, how they should drive and what consumption they should do. So when you're talking about the footprint of an organization, you include in your inventory all your scope 1 and 2 emissions and your non-product attributable scope 3 emissions. And those are the emissions that you need to reduce. So you don't need to reduce scope 3 emissions, the other scope 3 emissions, because those are the emissions that belong to the actual manufacturing and supplying of a particular product or service that you're making. So that means that you want to certify a product or service. And there the reduction ambition is different. If you want to get a product certified, and assuming that 2020 is your baseline, the target that we have is up to 2030 only for the time being. And you need to reduce a total of 25% by 2030. So you can see, assuming that 2020 is your baseline, that means that the inventory and the emissions caused by the delivery or the production of your product or service needs to go down with 2.5% per year till 2030. When we designed the program, we deliberately did not look further beyond 2030 because we first wanted to see how this was going to, how this was going to be accepted by our clients, because this is a challenge. It's not easy. So what are the emissions that you need to include in your inventory? Here you need to include only those emissions that really are directly resulting from the supply chain of your product or service. And so that's all the raw materials, that's land use change, that is transport, international transport, overseas, domestic transport, but perhaps also certain contractors that you need in order to be able to supply your product. All those emissions that directly originate from the delivery and the service that you provide. Also, you need to take into account in your inventory of the proportional amount of scope 1 and 2 emissions. So if you, for instance, are producing 100 products and 5% of these products are certified, that means that your organization was for 5% working on those products that you want to get certified. So you also need to take into account a proportional amount of 5% of your organization, of your footprint of the organization. So that's the proportional scope 1 and 2 emissions. What do you get then? This is sort of the overview. For organization, you take your scope 1, scope 2, and non-product attributable scope 3 emissions. For production, for product or service, this is proportional plus all your directly scope 3 emissions that are product attributable. You can, of course, also get everything certified, then, or your entire organization, and that means also your entire product portfolio. Then you include everything. There's one thing that I wanted to mention. There is this what we call 3-year flexibility rule. That means, I mean, in life things go a little bit up and down, right? Nothing is ever as static as visualized here. So that means that you have 3 years all the time to get back on track. So that means that you could underperform and overperform over 3 years, but after 3 years you need to be again on your reduction line. This is what we call the 3-year flexibility rule. Now,
I have one question.
Yes, please.
I have one question on that. Mathematically said 3 times 4.9%, it's somewhere above 14.5, I think, 14.8 or 7. That means that if in the first year we are overperforming like 8%, and in the second year we are doing it worse, way worse. Does it matter that at the end of the third year we have to come to a total of 14.7?
Yeah. So you need to be again after 3 years. The line here in 2023 would be, let's say, 3 times 4.9 is almost 15% reduction, a little bit less. So you need to be in that year compared to the baseline. That's where you need to be. Yeah.
Okay. Clear. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. As I was saying, sometimes, well, life is not as static as it looks like here visualized in these pictures. So we have several scenarios that we see happening quite often. One of the scenarios that we often see is an earlier baseline, scenario 2. If clients have already reduced a lot of or made a lot of reductions, it would be unfair if those cannot be included, right? Because honestly, if you take a look at the Paris Agreement, reductions need to be achieved compared to the baseline year of 1990. This is when the international community started to talk about that we need to have global reductions. So that is sort of the starting point. That means that our clients can choose any year up to 1990 as their baseline year. Now, a lot of clients, they have no insight in their operations in 1990. So in practice, we don't see this happening. But we do have sometimes clients that have made serious reductions already in the past, and they have their inventory data. They know all their emissions and they know where this is coming from, and they have the invoices and the receipts and all of that. So they can really demonstrate an earlier baseline. And so they will set an earlier baseline because the effect is that your reduction line becomes less steep, so that you have to reduce less year after year. Of course, in those interim years, you want to make sure that those reductions are being accounted for. There's also the scenario where clients are reducing faster, consistently, than is required by our standard. That means that they can eventually be labeled as a good performer, and that means that you get audit benefits. You don't need an annual audit anymore. If, of course, you're not for a certain reason, again, performing or overperforming, then of course you become a normal performer again, a normal client, and then you don't have these benefits anymore. Could also be the case that year after year, a client does not reduce enough. We have, of course, this 3-year flexibility rule. We also have the justifiable delay scenario. But in the end, eventually this client will become decertified. And that is serious, because that means that if you have products, you know, available on shelves, those perhaps need to be recalled or relabeled, and that is a serious thing. And the justifiable delay, that's a scenario that we've granted once last year. There was a client that could really demonstrate they wanted to get their product certified. They could really demonstrate that they needed some investments, and those investments would only pay off after, I think, 8 years. So for 8 years, they were underperforming. And then when they had achieved this investment and implemented this investment, suddenly they would be really well overperforming. It just needed time. So, and they had built this entire case, they had all the financials reserved and all of that. So in the end, we said, okay, this is a justifiable delay. But that's not just granted like that. You need to build really a case. I have a bit of a throat problem, so sometimes I have to drink a little bit. Then there's some other things that are important to take into account. I was just talking already about the 3-year flexibility rule. We also have another process that I'm going to explain about a little bit later. It's called the sector benchmark process. The whole idea is that we align these targets with what is really possible in the industry. And if together with industry partners, a justifiable case can be built that the targets set, as just discussed, are too low or too high, we reserve the right with the sector to change the target. For instance, right now we have a lot of clients that are operating in the coffee industry. We've set up a coffee expedition with them. So it's actually quite interesting to see what we are achieving here, because a lot of competitors are now in the same room. They're sharing their business operations with each other, and they're publicly disclosing with each other what the difficulties are that they're encountering, and they're sharing their good ideas and initiatives that they've taken. So what you see, and that's really fantastic to see, for the sake of a better, climate, competitors are willing to share their, let's say, secrets for a greater purpose, a bigger purpose. Together we're now building all sorts of pilots and insetting pilots to see how we can really collectively bring the emissions down. Because coffee farmers, they source from the same countries, they source from the same farms. So there's a lot of overlap in what they're doing. So this is really what we're trying to achieve with the sector approach that we have implemented in the standards design. We have a range of other flexibility rules for product certification. It's in Annex 4. And we have drafted an insetting framework. If insetting is a topic that interests you, which I think for some of you maybe, then please let me know in the chat, because then I will spend some time on that. It's quite detailed and we are still very much in brainstorming phase about this, but I can share a little bit of our thoughts on how we would like to achieve this. So if insetting appeals to you, then let me know, then I will make sure that we have some time for that as well. In certain situations, the baseline can also be corrected. Adjusted or corrected baseline is possible. That means that if, for instance, let's say that your company is merging with another company, and as a result, your footprint is going to double. Could be, huh? 2 companies, and it means also your footprint is going to double. So in that case, there is the possibility to adjust your baseline. Also for that, a justifiable case needs to be developed, but still, this is something facilitated by the standard. So in a nutshell, what makes our program unique? We are acknowledged by a seal, attributing to the credibility of our program. We have this mandatory reduction component, and the bar is high, as I was saying, but that's really because we believe this is the only way that we really create impact. We work with accredited certification bodies, so independent bodies that are accredited, that conduct all the audits so that there's really impartiality. And we really try to be innovative. And one of the things that I was just saying, through exploring different concepts like the sector benchmark approach, but also the in-setting approach. So we really try to be innovative to really facilitate that clients can achieve the reductions. These are the two logos of the certification bodies that we work with, EcoCert and Preferred by Nature, and the contact details of these bodies are on our website. You know, there's a lot of great other programs out there, and I mean, it's fantastic that there's all these programs. So I'm really not going to talk negatively about other programs and schemes, but this is just an overview. And yeah, maybe it's nice if you have some time to read how we differ from those. Yeah, but in a nutshell, I think, you know, I said it all. So what are we doing these days? We have market presence and we make impact in especially the following sort of segments or sectors: fashion, printing, online retail, utility, financial services, IT. We are growing very rapidly in food and beverages, all sorts of agricultural commodities that are now increasingly being certified. Approximately 30 million products are sold with our trademark, and the trademark is being used in approximately 14 countries, and we have approximately 60 clients certified. And here's an overview of some of our certified clients. This is perhaps a nice case, Arla. The biological products of Arla are being certified. And just to show you a little bit what happens, so the first thing that Arla was doing is they identified their GHG emissions throughout the supply chain. And so really they tried to set up a very good footprint that was holistic and complete. They also were very interested in setting a science-based targets with the Science-Based Targets Initiative. The emission reduction target is sometimes even higher, sometimes also lower, but sometimes also higher. But in their case, it was a 30% reduction by 2028 that they received from the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So that's quite ambitious. And then they started working concretely on developing a reduction plan, looking at all sorts of measures that they could take, looking at their packaging options, giving different food to the cows, renewable energy on farms, use of biogas in the factory, all sorts of measures that they were starting to take little by little with the aim to reduce their emissions. And they offset their remaining emissions by investing in offsetting projects. In their case, they have chosen for reforestation projects in East Africa and the preservation of tropical forests in Asia and South America. So actually, I think that Arla did not buy the credits with us, but with another buyer, with another broker, let's say. So yeah, that's an example of the fact that as a client, you can choose to buy your credits as long as they're credible and meet the requirements of our standard. And eventually, when they were ready, they had their plans ready and all the documentation in order. It was EcoCert, one of our CBs, that conducted the audit. And and to see if the offsetting activities were in compliance with the standard. This is another case, Fives. Fives is buying a lot of bananas, selling those to different retailers in the Netherlands. When they started, they really started, and they started with Plus Retail, to bring the first climate neutral certified bananas in Europe in 2019. And what was so interesting, they used, and I'm just, they used this technology to really trace all their bananas. So they really had a fantastic system being developed so that all consumers could scan the QR code on the banana to get insight in the supply chain emissions per activity and the emission reduction efforts made by Plus and other supply chain actors. So it was a really fantastic, nice project. just some quotes from clients. So, any questions so far about the spirit of the standard?
I don't have any questions in the chat.
No questions?
No, not so far.
Great. Then the standard. The standard contains all the criteria that you as a client need to comply with if you want to make a claim either on your product, service, or for your organization. As I was saying, you can choose for these scopes, but you can also choose all of them or just two. In the standard, maybe it's nice if I just open the standard. So this is the document. You just take a look at the criteria. So these are the criteria. And these are the numbers. This is sort of a summary. But here you can see if the criterion is applicable to the organization, product, or service. Very often there's overlap, so that is being referenced as IRM as CPROD, and CPROD is product certification. And sometimes requirements are only applicable from a certain year onwards. In this case, you can see from year 2 onwards only applicable. Under each requirement, there's sort of like a little summary of what the CB is going to look at. So what the certification body, the auditor, is going to look at. If you and how they're going to check if you're really compliant with that criterion. And sometimes what is most likely is that the auditor is going to do a tool check or a documents check or a system check. Sometimes they will check something through an interview in a conversation, and sometimes they just observe. They just look around and they observe and listen to what you're saying. So this is sort of useful for you to know how you're going to be evaluated. What else? Yeah, so the standard, of course, is quite a read, and it's quite technical. So in a sec, I'm going to show you a sort of a summary, which you can use, and there's different other materials that we have developed, which you can sort of use as a, as a sort of an assessment, a checklist, let's say. It's good to know that the standard is built up in 5 chapters. The first chapter is about a quality management system. I don't know, maybe some of you have ever heard about ISO 9001. A quality management system is just making sure that your operations are run efficiently, effectively, consistently, and basically that you can sort of have a general way of working that we can consider good practice with the right quality, adhere to what your clients need. Sorry, I'm really having a bit of a throat problem. So the quality management system, we believe, is very important to make sure that you can become compliant with the other chapters of the standard. So the requirements in the first chapter are not so much often core criteria, but they're more supporting criteria to facilitate that you will easily achieve the criteria of the other chapters. So in the quality management system, what we are asking for is that you have a proper document management system with version control of your documents, that you have systematic filing, that you have processes and procedures in place to assure that you are evaluating your performance and are implementing corrections and corrective actions if you're not meeting your performance quota, all of that sort of stuff. So that's really chapter 1. Chapter 2 is about setting your organizational and operational boundaries. In this case, you're going to look at, okay, which business or which products do I want to get certified? And which emission sources fall under those? If I have an organization, and maybe it's nice, we just received a question about setting the boundaries. Maybe we can use that now a little bit as a case. Is that okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
So we have a sales office in Breda.
Yeah.
We rent an office, and we have about 15 people, a sales team. Then
Great.
we have our main business is in Tongeren in Belgium, and there we have a logistics center where we receive our products, we store them, and then we sell them to our customers. We have Benelux customers, but we also organize the transport for German, Austria, and Switzerland transport for articles. So they leave from Belgium, from Tongeren.
Okay. And what are the products that you're delivering? What is your core business?
We have a whole range of packaging products. So all packaging products that you can use to send a product from A to B. So pallets, wooden pallets, plastic film, carton boxes, wooden boxes, labels, all those things.
Yeah, I think it's clear. And so would you like to get certain products certified, or would you like
No.
to start with certifying your organization?
We were thinking about certifying the organization. So the business in Tongeren as well as in Breda.
Yeah, 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 that makes a lot of sense. So what needs to be included then is all the emission sources, whether it's at the Breda office or the Tongeren office,
Yes.
that result in emissions. So I can imagine the sales office in Breda, you have perhaps some gas use, some electricity use, perhaps some
Yes.
commuting, business
Yes.
travel, maybe some people have lease cars and that kind of stuff, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And then in Tongeren, you perhaps have some facility, so you have a higher energy bill or gas bill, perhaps.
Yes, we have warehouses to store our products.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have
Yeah.
a car company
Yeah.
cars.
Yeah.
Things.
Do you make sort, because you're transporting your goods from A to B to your clients, etc. Is that under your own freight services, or are you using a contractor?
We are using a contractor to send the products to the other land countries than the Benelux.
Okay.
No,
So
it's to all the countries.
Yeah.
It's a contractor, and we have two own
to own
trucks.
vehicles. Yeah, yeah. So those two owned trucks needs to be included. The contractor does not need to be included.
It's not. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So just quickly hearing from what you're doing, it makes a lot of, I think the majority of your emissions will be electricity use and gas use in your production facility, but you may have a bit of emissions caused by commuting of your staff, because I imagine you have quite some staff, and yeah, business travel, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is quite straightforward, so this is not too complex at first sight for us. Yeah.
Okay.
There is one important thing though, what I should mention, and it's so nice that we're discussing this as a case. There is a requirement in the standard, and it's requirement 1.5, and I can show it to you so that you can actually see it. Oh, I have it in front of me. Sustainable sourcing incentivized. Requirement 1.5 of the standard. Requirement 1.5 of the standard requires that you as a client are going to do, and you're getting certified for your organization, that year after year you start working on making action in your supply chain. And what do we mean with that? The idea is that we're going to work towards project certification after 5 years. Why is that? That's because we feel that if we want to make impact in the whole, climate discussion, it is really needed that we look beyond scope 1 and 2 in the future. Because only scope 1 and 2, that's not where the majority of emissions are at the moment. Honestly, if everybody would reduce their scope 1 and 2 emissions, there would be no scope 3 emissions. Because if everybody works on their own scope 1 and 2 emissions, everything is basically covered. but we are far from that sort of surreal world. So that's why a lot of the emissions today are still caused by Scope 3 emissions. So we have this requirement in the standard, the requirement 1.5, that you start with mapping where your majority of emissions are coming from. And if more than 40% of your emissions are Scope 3 emissions, that means that you are eligible to start reducing emissions in your Scope 3 in the long run. So this is an important one. If you're signing up, and I don't think this is going to change either in a future version of our standard. So this is an important one. I just want to be honest with you. If you want to get certified for your organization, eventually you need to start certifying also your products. The speed of certifying your products is currently deliberately not included in this version of the standard. So technically speaking, right now, if you have a product portfolio of, let's say, 1,000 products, I don't know, maybe you have 50,000 products, I don't know. With one, you can suffice. So that was deliberately chosen for this version of the standard. But I can imagine that in a new version of the standard, we will upskill this model so that we have sort of a percentage of products that need to be certified year after year. And why is this? It's just because it is needed in order to achieve the targets of, of all these reductions that are needed by 2050. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions or comments or remark? I hope I'm not scaring people. I just want to be honest with you. Yeah. Okay, then I will just move on. So this is really what the exercise that we were just doing. This is really what is being done in chapter 2 of the standard. Once you know which emission sources to include and what your scopes and your boundaries are, then you're starting to quantify. You're starting to quantify all your emissions. So you're multiplying the amount of usage, electricity use, by a certain emission factor, and that results in so many emissions per year, for instance, or per factory, or depending on how. So that's your footprint calculation. Very often we use tools for that. CNG, we also have a tool called Smart Trackers. It's not mandatory to use it, but this is a tool that is often being used. And then once you know what your emissions are, and you know what the emissions of your baseline are, so maybe in the first year you actually have two different calculations, the baseline year calculation and your most recent footprint. And because I was just showing that your first footprint, your baseline footprint can be different from your first footprint that you want to get certified, if you want to have an earlier baseline. Then knowing your footprint and knowing what you have to reduce in line with the annual reduction target, you're going to define a reduction plan. And for that, we also have tools. And I'm going to show you in a second. So that's chapter 4 of the standard. And then chapter 5 is the standard. Okay, imagining that you're achieving those reductions, what kind of claims can you make? And how can you report publicly about the achievements that you're making? Because it is something that you can be super proud of. You've done a lot. And so we really want you to proudly report about all those achievements that you're doing. And we are offering also to support how you can design your packaging or how you can make beautiful claims and all of that. So we have our communications team helping you with that. Then we have a bunch of annexes to the standard, and I'm going to show some of these to you as well. The whole idea and the whole philosophy behind our certification standard is that it is a system of continuous improvement. Nothing needs to be perfect from the beginning. The whole idea is that you define your footprint as accurately as possible today, and little by little, you're going to look at what is working. How am I going to get a lower footprint? What kind of measures are making impact? Does this measure really result in the desired reduction that I would like to make. All of that kind of stuff. So you plan, you do, you check, and you act all the time. And if you're seeing that you're not going fast enough, or if you're going too fast, perhaps you've invested too much, maybe you have mobilized too many suppliers, you constantly play with it year after year to make sure that you're on this reduction line. So the whole system is really built towards planning, doing, checking, and acting. For the sake of time, unfortunately, I don't have time, but the next few slides is basically a high-level summary of the different criteria. So if you want to have a good starting point, and you don't have time right away to see, okay, is this program interesting for me, or what is really needed, then I suggest you to start reading these slides here so that you have a high-level overview of what is needed. It's a bit more of a holistic a summary version of a standard of 40 pages, here summarized in 6 or 7 slides. So I'm just sharing this with you. Several topics are in red because they're perhaps interesting for, well, things that are perhaps should receive a little bit of attention. So per chapter of the standard, you see these are the highlights. And chapter 5. Then I also have some highlights for certification of product. Unfortunately, due to time, I don't have time for that as well. But I recommend you, if you want to get your product certified, please read these 2 slides as well. Important, what I should mention, when you talk about the footprint of an organization, you talk about the footprint of all that was resulting from all the emissions that took place under your inventory. So if you're talking about the footprint of a product, then you talk about a PCF multiplied by the amount of units sold. So what does that mean? That is the footprint per unit product, perhaps per kilogram, per liter, per bag, anything that is being multiplied annually by the amount of products you've sold. And then you get your total footprint for that particular product. That means during the first audit, the auditor will only take a look at your footprint per unit product. And only once you are certified, from that moment onwards, you can sell your product as certified. So only the year after, when the auditor looks at, what was your total footprint, they multiply the amount of units sold with the product carbon footprint per unit product. And that is also the amount that needs to be offset. So offsetting only takes place from the moment you've sold products. And that is after you're certified. If there's questions about it, feel free to interrupt me. It's complex. All of that is being summarized here in the slides. So in a nutshell, Annex 1 of the standard gives an overview of which emission sources needs to be included in the product of either, in the footprint of either a product, company, or service. So when you're doing your inventory and when you're defining your boundaries, it's useful to take a look at this annex, Annex 1. Annex 2 talks about the sector benchmark tool and the rules about that. So we update our sector benchmark tool all the time on our website. And the sector benchmark tool is what I was just saying about the coffee expedition, really a tool to really make sure that similar clients that operate in the same sector are treated the same way. So there's sector rules defined in that benchmark tool. And everybody needs to abide by those rules. And that can mean that the target is set lower or higher, can weaken or tighten certain requirements. So there's always a sector approach for every single industry. Annex 3A and 3B of the standard contain an overview of databases with eligible emission factor sources and other secondary data sources. So what you see very often is clients that are just starting to become certified in the first year of certification, they don't have primary data yet. They don't know yet, let's say, what the exact figures are. So it is very legitimate that especially the first year, footprints are calculated using database data. So averages. And so for instance, if you are supplying bananas, and then you say, okay, I don't know exactly where my bananas are coming from, but I think it is a combination of Costa Rica, Colombia, and Ecuador. And then you calculate using this database, that is just basic, software packages. Then the software package calculates what the average is for those 3 countries. Usually secondary data is very conservative, so the emission sources and the emission data is usually relatively high compared to if you would collect the data yourself and calculate everything yourself. But that's an advantage to get started, let's say. So databases in Annex 3A and 3B given a lot of give an overview of useful tools to do this kind of calculations. Annex 4 gives a lot of rules, flexibility rules for product certification. I'm not going to discuss them in detail now. It's quite technical and quite complex, but just know that if you want to get your product certified, it is very useful to read Annex 4 so that you get a bit of an idea how it could work for you and how things become less complex. And then Annex 5 provides information about what we call our insetting philosophy or insetting approach. I'm going to say a little bit later about this, hopefully, if we have some time. It's quite technical, but insetting in short is, if you are a certified client, you're going to invest in your supply chain, and the investment results in certain reductions. These reductions can be subtracted from your footprint. So it's a sort of an alternative to offsetting, but in certain situations it can really count as a reduction measure so that you achieve your annual reduction target, and then you are easier compliant with our standard. And insetting is something that we see a lot in product certification of agricultural products, but it can work in any other supply chain as well. So if you're interested in this as a reduction measure, then it would be good if you have a talk later with our carbon advisor. They can explain it to you. And then we have Annex 6A and 6B. Those are tools related to how you can calculate if you're reducing it enough.
Helen, I think there's a question from you.
Go ahead,
yes,
please.
I have one question. The insetting, it triggered me to ask a question. Our company is a ICT distributor for refurbished products, refurbished hardware. What we do is we give let's say almost, it is hardware which are not used by the client anymore. We purchase it, we refurbish it, and give it a second life. In that process, is there any matter or any way that we can say that we can talk about insetting?
It's interesting because you have a lot of avoided emissions, actually, yeah?
Exactly. If I compare it, if I compare it with a new product, the FIA data sheets, it gives per vendor how many CO2 emission is brought up in the air. Yeah. And if we compare it with a refurbished product, then we have avoided a lot of them. So I was thinking, can you speak of insetting? I don't know.
I think there's definitely something that is possible. We would have to shape it differently. But if you're interested in this, we have to have a brainstorm session and discuss about opportunities, etc., and better understand your supply chain. So I'm not saying no at all.
Okay.
No.
Clear.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Would be very interesting. Yeah, it's a bit out of our comfort zone, but that's the whole insetting philosophy anyhow. So we are very much exploring, and actually, as we are speaking, we have set up different pilots because we are redesigning our insetting philosophy as we speak at the moment. And so we want to test a lot of it with doing these pilots before we make this new official rule that is endorsed by our stakeholders. So definitely this could be something that potentially could be very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Nice, thanks for sharing.
Okay.
Any other question? Then I just move on to the last annex of the standards, which is an assessment tool. It's basically a checklist that you can use to record for yourself whether or not you think you're compliant with a certain criterion. So it's really a useful tool to check your own internal status. This tool is also used by our pre-assessors, so our consultancy teams, when they evaluate your status and your performance. And it's also used sometimes by auditors. So it's a holistic tool that can be used by anybody that wants to achieve your compliance status. Do we need a quick break? Or shall I move on?
Quick break, maybe for a few minutes.
5
Yeah,
minutes?
I see some people asking
Yeah?
for some.
Okay, shall we move on 14:45?
Perfect. Fine
Yeah?
with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, thanks. See you in a bit.
You.
Werkt je stem nog?
Soort van. Shall I just wait a couple of minutes? Just to be sure.
Yeah, I see some people coming back in.
Yeah. Shall I just start? Maybe that's good, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, you can see my screen, right? Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
The assurance protocol. Yeah, I'd like to say a little bit about the assurance protocol. The assurance protocol is also available on our website, and this is a document that basically describes all the rules related to the entire certification process. So, what is needed to become certified? What are the rules? How often should I need an audit? What are the costs for an audit? How is the audit fee calculated? Who can conduct an audit? What rules are pertaining to those auditors? Eligibility criteria, etc., etc. So a lot of rules, really. It describes as well in very much in detail in section 2.3 how the certification process looks like. And this is really a snapshot, but I think it is important because what I often hear from clients is that, especially new clients, is that they said, well, I just didn't know it was, it involved all of this. I had no idea. So I really recommend you, if you're limited in time, if you want to read some part of the assurance protocol, please study section 2.3 because it is really describing what you can expect from the whole audit and certification process. And what we also really recommend is it can take quite some time before you're certified. So if your wish is to become certified next month, it's possible. It's not undoable, but it's more realistic to think it will take a little bit longer. And so what we always recommend, the time frame from start to end to become certified and to be allowed to make claims can take up between 3 to 12 months. It can be sooner, it can be later, but this is sort of really what you should think of. And so how does it look like? It first starts with a contract that you will sign with C&G, with us. And in this contract, you agree with us on the certification scope. And you will sign this contract with your carbon advisor. And the carbon advisor is your personal account manager. So you will be allocated to your own account manager and you sign this contract with this person. Then together with this carbon advisor, you will agree whether or not you're going to need any consultancy. And if you're going to buy offsets, either with us or with whom else you're going to buy them, because it's important that it's being checked up front that the offsets that you're buying are eligible for our program. Especially for new clients, we often recommend that you get some sort of consultancy from us. A lot of new clients, they usually require a pre-assessment from us. So we do sort of a check prior to the audit if we think that you're good to go. But sometimes clients ask us to do a footprint as well, or they ask us to prepare the reduction plan. Having said that, as a client, you remain responsible. So we just guide you, we help you on the way, but it's you that needs to do the job. So that's really important to realize. We give you a lot of support tools, we help to co-develop, etc. But in the end, during the audit, it needs to be you. You are the one that's going to present everything. So the way that we're doing pre-assessments, the way that we're helping with reduction plans is to really empower you to be able to explain it to the auditor. So during phase 2, which is sort of the implementation phase, you prepare for the audit, either with us or without us. That means you establish your management system, you develop your footprint, you develop your reduction plan, you implement your reduction measures. Basically, you do everything that's required in the standard. You also request your trademarks and claims approvals with us. So it is C&G that needs to make sure that prior to the audit, you have all label approvals in place. And so clients need to request the label approval to us upfront prior to the audit. And we can provide you with consultancy support, as I was just mentioning. And then actually the whole process around the audit starts. As a client, you request audit quotes. Basically, it's not needed, but it's what is very common in the industry, in certification land, let's say. We work with 2 CBs, and it's very common that clients request a quote from both CBs so that they can choose their preferred CB. C&G is out of this process. We're not involved in this. Why is that? It's purely for impartiality reasons. And we want to make sure that there's an independent, good quality audit. And for that, you engage in a relationship with the CB and you sign a contract with the CB. Then you as a client, you're requested to send all your audit documentation latest 2 weeks prior to the audit. So the CB, the auditor, has time to review all your documentation. Worst case scenario, the client does not submit all the documentation on time, or the documentation is incomplete, and then the auditor receives the right to say, okay, we're going to delay the audit with a couple of weeks, months, etc. What is good to know is that very often, almost always, there are some / major or minor non-conformities. It's very common. You don't have to worry about it. It's normal practice. What you then do is, if certain non-conformities are ascertained, during the audit, in the closing meeting, the client and the CB agree on a resolution time. When everything is okay, so after you've resolved your non-conformities, the second reviewer takes a final look. So this is to assure a 4 eyes principle. So an audit will always be reviewed by another reviewer, second reviewer. Sometimes called a certifier, certifying committee, can be a committee. And then either a positive or a negative certification decision is issued. And you will receive a certificate as well as an audit report. And in that audit report, it will also be mentioned what your non-conformities were and how they were resolved. Very important, from the moment that you are certified, so you have received your audit report and there's a date on it, from that date onwards, you are certified. And on the audit report and on the certificate, there will be a validity time. It's usually 1 year. From that moment, you may make claims. And from that moment only, you need to pay the program fee and you have to have eligible offsets. So let's assume that you're getting certified. Today is the 28th, 27th of June. Imagine that today is your certification date. You only need to pay the program fee for the remaining of this year. So not for the 1st of January till the 26th of June. That's important because sometimes, there's confusion and it's a pity because you don't have to pay for something that has not happened yet for things happening in the past. So you only pay offset and program fee to C&G from the moment that you're certified. I have a bit of an important remark here. If you are limited in time, because we all are, I'd really like to advise you to read section 2.3 of the assurance protocol. And if you want to get your product certified or some of your products certified, please also carefully read all the sections about product certification. They're the green sections in the assurance protocol. Because for products, things are a little bit more complex. So I just want you to, help you or gear you towards what should receive your attention. So here's an overview of the audit timelines. We recommend you to ask your audit quotations, to contact the CB, latest 2.5 months prior to the desired audit date. If you want to make use of a consultant to help you with your pre-assessment or to draft your reduction plan or your footprint, really make sure that there's enough time, because unfortunately, our consultants are very busy. We are a growing organization. Climate is hot. So just to make sure that you're not disappointed that, somebody's not instantly available tomorrow. Also important, as I was just saying, submit your documentation latest 2 weeks before the audit date. After the audit, there can be non-conformities, and those can take up to 3 months before they're resolved, sometimes even longer, depending on what you agree with the auditor. But also you need to take into account that there's a lead time of approximately 1 month to receive the certificate. That's because of internal processes. The second reviewer needs to take a look at it. Often the invoice should be paid by the client. Sometimes it just takes another month of admin work. So the certificate usually you receive several months after the audit. And the validity of the first year is 1 year from the moment a positive certification decision is issued. And we recommend you to plan the next audit at least 3 to 6 months before your certificate expires. Again, this is a bit of a gamble, but we really advise you to better to plan it too early than too late. There is the possibility of a time extension, so you receive an extension or your certificate, but it's rather a situation that you don't want to get into. And technically speaking, if you don't have a valid certificate, you're not allowed to make claims. Now there's always a transition time and etc. And it's not going to be like if you have your product certified in the shelves and tomorrow your certificate expires that we are going to force you to remove all these products from stores. Of course not. But for your own sake as well, it's just better to have continued cycles. So what to share with the CB prior to the audit? This is an overview. You can find this also in insurance protocol. So this is all the documentation that the CB, the auditor, needs to receive upfront. And that's things like your organizational structure, your climate policy document, an overview of your certified products, an overview of your organizational process map, the footprint of the previous calendar year, as well as, if applicable, the footprint of the baseline year, an updated reduction plan, the invoices or the commitments that you are going to offset now or in the future, claims and trademarks approvals obtained from C&G, and optional, the self-assessment checklist. So during the audit, these will be the main documents that are going to be discussed. So what can you expect during the audit? Often an audit is composed of 3 different phases: an opening meeting, the actual compliance verification, and the closing meeting. In the opening meeting, we will discuss the scope of the certification, which products are certified, how does your organization look like, who's reporting to whom, which emissions are excluded, and is there a justification for that kind of stuff. Also, very often management shall be present during the opening meeting, can also be during the closing meeting. Sometimes that happens as well, because one of the things that we find very important is that management is really committed, because in the end, the success of the implementation of the requirements of the standard really depends on the financial, as well as the financial support, as well as the resources made available by management, and in terms of financial flows, but also capacity, etc. So if management is not fully aware of what is committed in the reduction plan and what is needed in order to make sure that those reductions can be achieved, then your certification is not going to succeed. They really believe that management needs to be really involved in this. Otherwise, it's not going to work. That's why it's so important that management is really committed and that they demonstrate their commitment during the audit and after the audit. Then the compliance verification, so the second phase of the audit, Just that's it. A systematic review will be done to check the compliance with each criterion of the standard. Very often there's so much documentation and there's so many data records. So very often things are checked on sample basis. So if you have, for instance, a footprint of 20 tabs and each tab consists of 100 rows, then of course it's not possible for the auditor in that day or 2 days that they're doing the audit to check every single data input. So they're going to check things on sample basis. What is very important is that during that compliance verification phase, the auditor will ask for evidence and assumptions and subcalculations and justifications. So basically, records that are being demonstrated to the auditor need to be substantiated with actual calculations or an explanation of assumptions made or actual evidence. And evidence that can be invoices, it can be ERP extracts, it can be photos, it can be logbooks, it can be actual interviews with staff. All sorts of evidence can function to substantiate the data entry in the different documents being shared with the auditor. And then there's the closing meeting, and in the closing meeting, the auditor will say, okay, I think you comply with this, this, and this. Here, I still lack something. Or here, I think you need some improvement. Or here, this is really something that's not okay. This is going to be a minor or major nonconformity. And then for all those nonconformities or observations, together with the client, the auditor agrees on a time frame for corrections and corrective actions. A correction is, making a correction from something in the past. So making a correction. A corrective action is more like a preventive measure to make sure it's not reoccurring and to prevent it from happening again. That's the difference. So for a summary of what the auditor will check, I recommend you to read section 2.5 of the assurance protocol. Here's a difference between major and minor nonconformities, very short. There's 2 levels of nonconformities that we have integrated in our program. A minor nonconformity is, for instance, a calculation error in the footprint, or there's a calculation error in the reduction plan, or an emission source is not included, or the climate policy has a typo, this kind of stuff, minor issues. Major nonconformities are system breakdowns in the sense that the system doesn't work anymore. And what I mean with system is that the total result is completely off. For example, you've forgotten to include 5 sites in your calculation of your footprint. And you've only included 1 site and the other 5 sites you forgot to include for whatever reason. That's really, a major problem in your footprint then. Or you have made a reduction plan, but you had such huge typo and everything should be multiplied by factor 10 or factor 100, I don't know. Like really big problems that mean that you have to really change something before you can actually become certified. And these should be solved on priority basis. And the latest time frame for this is within 3 months. Once you have resolved the nonconformity, whether major or minor, you resend your documentation to the auditor will review, and usually they don't come on site. It's usually a documentation check, not always, but usually, and then eventually you still receive a positive certification decision. So in our assurance protocol, we have an overview. It is not needed that every year you have the same high intensity audit. So this is sort of like a decision tree. If you're a good performer, you can skip certain years. And there's also certain years where you only need a desk review and the auditor does not need to come on site, with the advantage that you don't have travel costs. So yeah, take a look at this model. The first year is for new clients, it's always an on-site audit, unless there is, a situation like COVID, then we do remote audits. But the idea is, and this is what usually clients like to will, and it's so interesting because I would really recommend you not to be scared for the audit. see the audit as an opportunity, and this is the way that our auditors are trained. The audit is an opportunity for you to learn. So we're not, our auditors are not trained to be police agents that are going to punish you or anything like that. No. We always look together collectively for how to solve a certain issue. And